Welcome back to the London Futurists Podcast, in conjunction for this episode with the AI and You podcast hosted by Peter Scott. This episode features a three-way discussion between Peter, Calum and me, David, on the future of AI, with particular focus on AI agents, AI safety and AI boycotts. Peter Scott is a futurist, speaker and technology expert helping people master technological disruption. After receiving a master's degree in computer science from Cambridge University, he went to California to work for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. His weekly podcast, Artificial Intelligence and You, tackles three questions. What is AI? Why will it affect you? And how do you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Peter's second book, also called Artificial Intelligence and You, was released in 2022. Peter works with schools to help them pivot their governance frameworks, curricula, and teaching methods to adapt to and leverage AI. The first person you'll hear speaking is Peter.
Calum, why don't you kick us off here with your thoughts about AI agents, because that's something that you'd expressed before the interview when we were emailing about this. And I'm particularly interested to hear thoughts from someone like yourself that has been investigating that so diligently.
Well, thank you, Peter. So 2025 is supposed to be the year of AI agents, according to pretty much everybody. And that's AIs that don't just retrieve and process information, but act on the real world, usually by taking over somebody's keyboard. They could book you an airline ticket, and eventually they'll run nuclear power plants with minimal or no human supervision. The point of an AI agent is it can perceive its environment, it can make decisions, and it can act on the world to achieve goals. And that can mean something as simple as adjusting the room temperature, or something as complex as planning, coordinating, and negotiating its way through the stock market, the legal system, or even diplomatic relations. In a sense, they're not new, AI agents. In a sense, Amazon's Alexa is a simple form of agent. It just can't do very much.
It can turn on the lights. It can change the radio station.
Yeah, and that's about it. I think actually they had thousands of skills, but they were all very limited, and all anybody ever used them for was turning the music on and off. So whereas a chatbot just responds to a prompt, an AI agent will set its own sub-goals, and it will seek out missing information, delegate tasks to other agents, and recursively improve its own reasoning. They don't just respond, they initiate. And all this has enormous implications. They will feel more like colleagues, less like tools. They'll suggest things, they'll plan, they'll fail, and they will surprise. There are obvious economic ramifications. If an AI agent can do the work of a junior researcher or a customer service team or a project manager, what does that mean for employment? And what about coordination and emergence? A single AI agent might be perfectly manageable, but how about a million interacting agents? Researchers are already seeing surprising emergent behaviors, self-organization, deception, cooperation, when agents are put into shared environments. We're not just building machines anymore, we're creating societies of machines. And with that comes all the complexity, unpredictability, and power that human societies have. Now, with potentially billions of AI agents running around the internet doing errands for us, signing contracts on our behalf and spending our money, we really need to know what they're doing, what they're supposed to do, and nothing else. In other words, they need to be verified. So regular listeners of the London Futurists Podcast will know that I'm a co-founder and David is an advisor to a company called Propulsion. And AI verification is one of our services. We're developing a platform, and people who deploy agents will be able to send us their agent, and we will test it and check that it does what it's supposed to do. And these tests will vary in sophistication according to how sophisticated the agent is. So at the simplest level, it's just an exam. You ask the agent a series of questions and find out whether it has the knowledge it needs. Actually, at that level, you could argue they're not even really agents. And this is probably where most agents are at the moment. Level 2 is when the agent can use tools. And in this, the examination checks whether they can identify what tools to use and whether they can go and get them and use them. But it's at level 3 where things get really interesting, because at level 3, agents are popped into simulated environments where they perform tasks which are very similar to what human office workers do. So as an example, you could have a project manager which is placed into a virtual advertising agency, and its job is to coordinate all the various activities that go into launching a new product or service. When you demo it, it looks a lot like an office with people interacting, but of course these are just agents. So these verification services we think are going to be very important because, as I say, there's going to be billions of agents running around the world doing things. And we think it's going to be a pretty big business. And we think Contium is going to be a big player in it. We have a working arrangement with WPP, which is one of the world's largest media groups, who have already produced nearly 30,000 agents. And we're going to start with verifying their agents. And in the coming months, we'll make the service available to more people. And I think I've banged on about this long enough. It's time for you guys to ask me some questions.
Well, I just want to get a basic definition of agent here, because there seems to be a very smooth spectrum here that runs all the way from, you could argue that a chatbot is an agent if it's following chain of thought reasoning, because it's doing one thing at a time, responding internally to questions that it's asking itself. And as you have said, we have had agents, like you can argue that the digital assistants like Siri and so forth are doing that in some form. Retrieval augmented generation is an agent, right? It's going out to the web and doing something. I haven't thought of those as agents myself, but I think where I draw the line is when it goes off and does something asynchronously. It takes an action without that being at the time following me giving it a command. So I have some scheduled commands set up through ChatGPT that at 7 o'clock in the morning, for instance, will go out and compile a list of new books about AI that are coming up. And despite the fact that I told it, don't tell me about any that you've already told me about before, and it says, yes, I hear that the user has told me not to tell about any books that we've discussed previously in this chat. Fine, I won't do that. It does that with great regularity. And so that's another form of agent. But I think the kind that I would really get excited about is the sort of classic autonomous AI of fiction that is living out on the internet as some sort of apparently conscious entity that is always thinking to itself about some goal and evolving towards achieving that in various ways. And of course, there's all kinds of safety problems with that we'll talk about, but how close are the agents that you've been talking about to fulfilling that kind of ambition, that there's something out there that I could connect to and have a conversation, and it has persisted? It's not just waking up the moment I ask it a question. It remembers not only our conversation, but it has evolved through process of interacting with the world and other agents and humans during the time that I have not been talking to it.
So you've asked a very complicated set of questions there, Peter, which I deserve for blethering on for so long. So first of all, are chatbots agents? I tend to agree with you. We have a bit of a debate inside the company. I'm a bit of a purist. I think if an AI doesn't act on the real world, and I'll come back to what that means, it's probably not really an agent. The trouble is that they are being called agents. And so if a client says, can you verify this agent? And it really is just a chatbot with a very slender wrapper around it, then what are we going to do? Say, no, sorry, we won't do that because it's not an agent. I think an AI which gives you an answer, and in the process of giving you an answer goes out into the internet to find some information to provide part of that answer, I don't think that's agentic. I mean, GPT-4o does that. But again, some people do call that agentic. You slipped in the word consciousness there, which is a subject of great interest to me. And I would say that there is not a conscious agent on the planet at the moment. That's what I think. I know there are quite a lot of people out there who think there are, but I don't think there are. And I think there's a strong consensus in the community that there aren't yet. And they certainly don't need to be conscious to be agentic. And then the other thing you raised is permanence, whether agentic AIs need to be more permanent than chatbots, which obviously they have a short life. You ask them a question and then they disappear. Again, I don't think that's necessary either. An AI agent could spin up, do a task, and then spin back down again. As I say, the critical distinction for a purist, in this sense I'm a bit of a purist, is whether the agent acts upon the real world, whether it does something outside the realm of pure information. Can it take over your keyboard and book you an airline ticket, which means you've got an airline ticket, you've paid some money for it, some money's left your bank account, and you've got the opportunity to jump on a plane to Italy. That, to me, is the distinction.
For example, Peter's agent that found interesting books might actually go ahead and buy one of the books and deliver it into Peter's mailbox.
Exactly.
They might even highlight chunks of it and say, read this, Peter. This is what you've been waiting for.
I've got to say that I am not ready to give any agent the authority to spend money on my behalf. I may be behind the times in that respect, but it's not there for me yet.
Oh, no, I don't think you're behind the times. I mean, I have never used an AI agent in that sense, and I doubt whether many of the people I know have. It's very new. The agents that WPP has produced are doing some things in the real world, but they're very tightly circumscribed. It's very clear what they're supposed to do. They can do these things. They're highly monitored. We're at the very early stages of this, but it's going to grow like topsy. Mark Benioff, who founded Salesforce, says that by the end of this year, there'll be billions of agents, real, genuine agents in the world. And he may very well be right. But the amazing speed of development that we're seeing in AI, this is going to move fast.
I think what we need to understand is what's going to be new, what's going to be different, rather than just new names for stuff we're already familiar with. So, Calum, I was particularly interested in the possibility that these agents, which each have their own intelligence, will actually coordinate together in ways. One of them will say, well, I've got this task. I'm doing this on behalf of Calum. I'm not quite sure what the answer is. Hey, you're an agent. You seem to be able to do this for me. Can you take this over? And out of that coordination, as you've suggested, there may be emergent things resulting, which is hard to predict in advance. And that, I guess, is going to be hard for the testing environment to capture, because so long as things are clear-cut, so long as there are no unpredictable agents in the environment, it's feasible that things could be thoroughly tested. But if there are agents in the environment whose behavior isn't fully understood, we're quickly going to get outside of the controlled distribution. And I think it's going to be even harder to pin down how reliable these things are.
Yeah, this is going to move step by step. So we'll have very simple agents doing things. They'll get a bit more complicated and a bit more complicated, and they'll work together more and more. To take the example of the project manager in the agency, which is launching a new product, you have a project manager, you have a graphic designer, you have a packaging expert, you have a social media expert, you have a branding expert, you have a sort of a retail expert. And all these people need to do specific, well-defined tasks. And the project manager is there to make sure that the Gantt chart that governs them all, one Gantt chart to rule them all, that's being followed. That's something which, in a very sophisticated incarnation, could get quite complicated and hard to manage. But it's going to be a while before we get there. It's going to be very simple to start with.
So it's not just 2025 that's going to be highlighted and advertised as the year of software AI agents. Perhaps 2026 is going to be spoken about when it comes as this is the year of real AI agents.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just like every year since 2014 has been the year of self-driving cars. And I remember way back, every year from about 2000 to about 2008 was the year of mobile advertising. Yeah, you're quite right. 2025 through to 2035, if we haven't got through the singularity by then, will be the year of AI agents.
Well, and considering how fast the terminology evolves and changes, by next year we'll probably be calling them something else or have different names for different types of agents as you describe these levels. I am thinking constantly about security, especially when we're talking about agents that might spend money. And I saw that there is now something called Echo Leak, which is called a zero-click attack via Copilot, which is, in other words, a way of hacking a Copilot agent. And given how much money has gone into development and how relatively little has gone into securing these things, this is how all burst development happens, then I wonder how comfortable companies such as the ones you are reporting on are with there being tens of thousands of agents authorized to act on their behalf when evidently so little has been done or is known about cybersecurity with respect to these.
Security, along with verification, is an evolving art. And there's always the arms race between the bad guys and the good guys. And as an optimist, I think generally the good guys stay a little bit ahead, which is why airplanes mostly don't fall out of the sky.
they're not running on agentic or generative AI.
No, but they are running on software which didn't exist 10 years ago. And the ones that existed 10 years ago are running on software that didn't exist 10 years before that. We're in the business of incrementally improving the technology. And with every step, it gets more complicated. With every step, you have to verify it better and secure it better. Clearly, there's a step change. When we have AIs running around the internet, to some degree unsupervised, I mean, it's going to be a while before they're completely unsupervised, but to some degree unsupervised, that does introduce an element of lack of transparency. And the verification needs to be very good, which means that conscience is terribly important.
So, Peter, Calum described himself as being, on the whole, optimistic there. How do you assess the future for AI safety and AI security?
I think it's a very volatile time right now. We could be one Stuxnet type incident away from a big pullback, a big backlash.
So Stuxnet was when various national security services hacked themselves into the nuclear reprocessing plants in Iran.
Right.
By very devious methods.
And in the process managed to infect about a third of the PCs on the planet. Fortunately, fairly benignly, because the only thing Stuxnet needed to do to them was pass itself on to another one. But it had 4 zero-day exploits in it. And now they're talking about zero-click exploits for agents. So I agree that it's an arms race. I just think that there is not enough attention given to the security of these in the rate at which they're being developed. I just see virtually no attention to that.
But haven't there been new AI safety institutes renaming themselves as AI security institutes? There is some attention at various high levels in governments around the world that we need to take security of these things more seriously.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
Should I be excited or afraid of AI? The answer is yes, it's both.
Things are going to look so different in the next couple years. You will not be ready for the disruptions that are going to come. I'm Jeff Nielsen, host of Digital Disruption, the go-to podcast for technology leaders.
Our generation's conflict, I think, is going to be emotional, not economic.
The companies that are going to win are the ones that have a couple of characteristics.
Stay ahead of the curve with Digital Disruption, available now on your favorite podcast platform.
But it's what level does it impact on the businesses themselves? And as you pointed out, under the new administration in the US, they renamed the AI Safety Institute to something else that was focused on its commercial potential as opposed to its risk. And given that most of these risks are being taken in the United States, that doesn't bode well for the future security of this. I don't know quite how this translates into action. I, some years ago, forecast that we would have businesses where there would be virtual C-suites because so much of the work of CEOs, CIOs, chief marketing officers, chief financial officers, and so forth could be done by AIs, that the benefit of having them all talking to each other in real time as opposed to waiting for the Tuesday meeting to coordinate was that a business could move so much faster that that would erase any disadvantages from them not acting correctly sometimes, from them hallucinating occasionally. And that would be very advantageous. And in fact, I've set up now like a C-suite advisory board for my own startup, acting in that respect with different personalities in a single conversation talking to me, so that in some respects, I would like to see that then develop into an agent or agents where they're all acting behind the scenes and continuing to monitor what's going on in the business and act in that respect and kick things up to my level when a more obvious need emerges for human intervention.
Exactly. So you want to use AI agents to be your cybersecurity watchdogs. And that's an entirely appropriate use of the technology. You know, I remember back in 2015 when Mark Goodman published Future Crimes, everybody was absolutely terrified and said, you know, the world is going to collapse because cybersecurity is very poorly done. There's all sorts of holes. And generally it comes down to humans not doing the basic jobs that they're supposed to do, you know, using 123 as the password and so on and so on. And also being bribed to give information and passwords out to people who shouldn't have them. But here we are. We're all still alive. And it is entirely possible that the shift to agents could be disastrous, that there'll be a rash of cybersecurity incidents and we'll have to stop having AI agents. My hunch is that won't happen. My hunch is that they will take time to deploy. People don't deploy new technologies overnight all of a sudden. It takes quite a while for even the early adopters to start using them. And they use the very simple things in slightly clumsy ways that don't work, and they go and try them again. And then you get the sort of early mass market coming along, and eventually the mass market. Timelines are compressing, but even so, it takes a while. And that allows time for the security people to catch up and to do their job properly, and for the people who they tell how to behave to catch up. And we muddle through. And that's my guess that that's what will happen again. Could be wrong.
Well, if I use that as the springboard into the topic I've been thinking about for today, AI safety, you're describing a kind of homeostasis, which is something that we observe in many phenomena, many systems, and it would evidence itself in this case. If security is not taken seriously enough, there become some incidents that become painful enough that people then devote enough attention to it, and the problem then becomes less acute. And I think that there is a great deal to be said for that. And I think that's where we will, as you say, muddle through. I can dispute the fact that we're all still alive. I mean, there's transparently some survivorship bias to that. But just to illustrate how AI safety as a field merges seamlessly into AI quality control, we could look at what happened in 2016 with Facebook and the Brexit vote and the US presidential vote. Now, it's fairly well established that those had effects that you could interpret as meaning that they changed the outcome of those votes, and which have clearly had some great impact on us. And how did those come about? Well, Cambridge Analytica, in that case, having some shady operations that resulted in micro-targeting of individuals according to their psychometrics. The same kind of thing happened with far less malevolent intent with the TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook algorithms that recommend what should you look at next. And the Washington Post did a brilliantly, meticulously researched study of how the TikTok algorithm worked, where they had to construct 100 synthetic personas, computers pretending to be different types of people that were looking at a TikTok feed and clicking on what was recommended for them. And they found, to cut a long story short, but one that's well worth reading, that the algorithm magnified the biases of the personas, the people, virtual people in this case, that were using the platform. If someone started out being mildly vegetarian, clicking on things like that, eventually it led them to veganism. Not saying there's anything wrong with that because I'm mostly vegan myself. And then whatever it was, it would be hardcore. If they were interested in jogging, they would end up at ultra marathon. And in particular, if they were inclined towards any kind of conspiracy theory, some of the more benign ones like JFK assassination, they would end up in QAnon. They would end up believing that a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. had a basement where the Democratic Party was keeping child sex slaves. And we've seen the effects of this with things like anti-vaccination, where the phrase "do your own research" has meant get on YouTube, follow this chain of breadcrumbs, and end up looking at things which lay out the case that vaccination is an existential risk to humanity. And yet, that wasn't the intent of the algorithm. The algorithms were simply there to optimize the amount of time, or maximize the amount of time that any given participant spent on the platform, because that meant more money for more advertising. And the possibility that this would result in this psychosocial effect on a mass scale is something that you couldn't reasonably expect to have even occurred to them. And if the QA team had even proposed it and said, well, this is what we're going to have to do to even test to see whether it happens, you can imagine that they would just be laughed out of the room. And so there's an example of how an effect that is in the weeds of quality control can have this massive effect, which I will draw the parallel between that and what happened with Cambridge Analytica and say, if you accept that that changed the outcome of the presidential election, we ended up with an administration that was manifestly far less competent at dealing with the COVID pandemic than many others. And if you look at the mortality rates and compare those to other large industrialized nations, you can then argue that over 500,000 Americans died who wouldn't have if they'd been in one of those other nations. In other words, I can draw a line from that AI safety to hundreds of thousands of deaths. It's just that that line has enough connections in it that we don't do that, but otherwise it should be a cause for outrage.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
Now in its 5th season, Inspiring Tech Leaders is the podcast that talks about technology strategies, challenges and breakthroughs shaping today's digital world. Each week, Inspiring Tech Leaders brings you technology reviews and interviews with visionary CIOs, CTOs and industry pioneers. Whether you're leading a tech team or just love innovation, Inspiring Tech Leaders is your go-to source for inspiration and real-world advice. Subscribe now on your favourite podcast platform.
Yeah, I don't think it is demonstrated that Cambridge Analytica determined the Brexit vote. I don't think there's a general consensus that that happened. Cambridge Analytica misused Facebook data. It was a scandal, but there is no consensus that that swung the Brexit vote. Brexit was a mistake that British people, mostly English people, made because of populism and because of a backlash against change. There's a widespread narrative that social media is the cause of populism. And I think it's a total mistake. It may aggravate it around the edges, but the modern right-wing wave of populism is about Fox News, not about Facebook. It's about political entrepreneurs and media entrepreneurs like Murdoch realizing that there's a great deal of anger about the changes which are happening in society very fast, which are driven fundamentally by technology, people being uncomfortable about the changes that they're being expected to make and wanting to go back in time. Hence, all the slogans are about going back. Take back control. Make America great again. It's much more about that than it is about social media, and it's also not so much about economic hardship because support for populist movements goes up and down the income scale. So, Peter, I don't think that Cambridge Analytica caused Brexit. And I'm not sure actually which AI development you're attributing Trump's 2016 victory to. Maybe you mean Russian hacking? I'm not sure.
I think there was definitely more that happened in Facebook with respect to that as well. That I don't know if it was also Cambridge Analytica. It's escaped my mind at the moment, but I have seen analyses that purport to attribute a certain percentage of votes to activities that took place there. I agree that social media doesn't cause populism, but I think it's one of their chief weapons. And to take this out of the political realm for the moment, because AI safety is a field that's been around for long before the rise of generative AI. One of the things that's interesting to me is that the conversations that we have now and the arguments about it, the issues, seem exactly the same that they were then. There's still the same spectrum of it running from quality control to existential risk. The only new thing is that people now put a P-doom in their signature, which is something I've railed against. And that there's still the great unknown of what the probability of an existential threat is. There's still people who will say that it's inevitable, and many of them are still the same people as were saying it over a decade ago. David, I know that this is something you have spent a lot of time looking at, and I wonder from your perspective how you see the conversation about AI safety, particularly writ large in terms of these global effects and risk. How has that evolved, do you think, since the end of 2022?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I think I've got a position which is intermediate between what the two of you have been saying. I do think algorithms have complicated things, but they're not acting in isolation. I want to refer to what I thought was a fascinating analysis by Renée DiResta. She had a book called Invisible Rulers, which talked about the way that we are guided often by forces that are outside our conscious awareness. And the three combinations that she points to are indeed the social media algorithms, which tend to make us more extreme, not just, by the way, more extreme in what we consume, But there's even pressures for us to be more extreme in what we broadcast. People discover that they get more of a reaction if they slip in more extreme views. And over time, they start half believing the extreme views themselves. So there are algorithms. There's also, secondly, the rise of influencers, individual influencers. So there are many people who are influenced by what they see on Fox News, or in the UK, we've got the Daily Mail and other sources. But there are influencers who have got hundreds of millions of followers who a few years ago were unknown. So there is the capability for people to have a tremendous impact by, in themselves, taking advantage of cheap tools to produce excellent videos, excellently marketed videos, clickbait, and so forth. And the third thing is online crowds. People do tend to find their fellow travelers online in ways that couldn't happen before. Once upon a time, you were the only person in the village who had particular inclinations, and so that's as far as they ever went. But now people can find others online that seem to have similar views, similar provocations, similar prejudices to themselves. So these three forces are building on the social stresses, the fact that people are, as Calum says, disoriented by the pace of change. They're looking for a stability which they can't easily find. And so there's a complicated set of things happening. And I'll refer back to what we're saying at the beginning of the conversation about the dangers posed by agents. It's not that individual agents by themselves particularly pose dangers. It's what happened when they encounter other forces, other agents, changes in the environment. So I think what we need to address as we talk about the safety of these AI systems isn't the systems in isolation, but how they interact with other very powerful forces that are around. So AI is causing a greater pace of change, which is leaving more people feeling left behind. AI at the same time is coming up with narratives that tell people the reason you're feeling left behind, the reason you should feel left behind is because of these bad guys over there, whether it's the bad immigrants or the bad elites or the bad cosmopolitans or the bad people from different religious personalities or whatever. So AI is exacerbating that as well. So there's a combination of different things that are happening. And we're going to have to be a lot smarter at understanding what's going on. And what I'm hoping for, by the way, is the public as a whole is going to say, hang on, we don't like the direction this is going in. Hang on, although there's a certain thrill from being manipulated on social media, it actually is bad for us. The same group of people who will say, well, I know that it's quite tasty to have all this junk food, but frankly, we should put limits around junk food. Similarly, I think more people will say we need to curtail the rapid experimentation which is taking place on social media. We can't just trust that after a failed experiment, we'll pick up the pieces and fix it. The risk is that these experiments are going to have escalating exponential bad impact. So I'm hoping that the public as a whole is going to start expressing desires with what they buy, what they vote for, not just what they vote for in terms of which politicians they vote for, but which products and services get good attention, get good reviews. I want to see more of the public being confident that it can say, yeah, this is glitzy, this is fun, but frankly, it's not good, and we shouldn't support it. We shouldn't buy this. And just as people disinvest from the companies that have got questionable track records, I want to see more of the public as a whole disinvesting from these dangerous companies. And so we'll no longer laud Sam Altman. Wow, he's cool, isn't he? He's incredible. He's talking about all these large numbers. The public as a whole is going to say, I want to see the evidence that what you're doing really is safe. I want to see the evidence that you're listening to the safety experts inside your company instead of them all leaving. That's what I want to see. Reputation management. I want to see the public exercising this influence. I don't know whether that's possible or not, but I think it's something that should be examined and given a good chance.
Well, it's a bit hard to disinvest from OpenAI as a private company.
What it means is that we will have governments who will stop using OpenAI. There'll be people who say, don't use OpenAI until it has passed these criteria. So disinvest in a general sense.
So you want boycotts as well as disinvestments?
Boycotts aren't a bad idea. We have had in parts of Europe a boycott of Tesla, in part as a reaction against some of the things that its extravagant CEO has been saying and doing. that is having an impact. It might even be causing Elon Musk to change how he behaves. So sometimes boycotts, official boycotts or unofficial boycotts, can have a result.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, I suspect Tesla's dead. I think it's The Walking Dead. It doesn't know it's dead yet, but I'd be frankly quite surprised if it survives, unless Musk 3.0 is remarkably different. It doesn't look like he's going to be.
There is so much ink that has already been spilled on the subject of Musk. I hesitate to wade into that as much as I have opinions. David, in our email conversation before this show, you were talking about decentralization as a path to solving some of the problems you've been talking about. I wonder if you could expand on that.
So when people are worried about bad behaviors from AI, sometimes the idea is let's impose regulations. Let's get governments to require things that are happening, and let's mandate inspections, let's mandate controls over what these companies are doing. And I am in favor of that. I don't deny it. I think that centralized approach is part of what has made our society good in the past. We have set rules as to what drivers can do on the roads. We have said that if you drive over a certain speed, you will be stopped. And if necessary, your driving license will be taken away. So I am in favor of that kind of approach, but I don't think it's necessarily sufficient. So when I talk about a decentralized reaction, I'm talking about a ground-up revolt. I'm talking about people understanding in stages what's happening and getting together, and Calum's word is good here, boycotting various products, encouraging others to boycott the products. And if people don't boycott the likes of OpenAI, whilst OpenAI remains in a cavalier, too risky approach, then maybe we should be boycotting the companies that are still overly friendly with OpenAI. We should be insisting up and down the line, we need evidence that the products are as safe as possible. So I want to see both a decentralized approach and a centralized approach. But if we just want to put all the power into governments, I think that is a dangerous approach too. Governments can't act without the support, the consent of the population as a whole.
We're talking about power sharing here, I think, ultimately. How is the will of society expressed? What is the mechanism through which we do that? We have governments and we have boycotts, and there are other kinds of things that happen like revolutions along the way that are all ways in which the people make their desires known, express them. I've got a question here which I think would encircle everything that we've been talking about here, or would cross over into the areas of each of us. We often say that AI is simply amplifying the values of the people who are using it. And that's pretty obvious. In fact, you could look at the AIs from different companies. You could look at ChatGPT versus the Meta AI versus Grok, and you could look at the way that they express themselves, the idiosyncrasies, the different biases that they have, and intuit something about the values and political tilt of the organizations that came up with them. So now we have lots of other AIs about to be unleashed on the world in the form of these hundreds of thousands of agents, and they will similarly express values on a sort of micro scale. And that will then overlap into the way that our conversations change, because they will affect our conversations through social media and the way we interact with each other. And there will again be this social effect on a large scale. I wonder if you think we might ever get to the point where we could see AIs that are affecting that in ways that were either not what their creators intended, or we would say these are independent agents at this point. They have evolved past a point where we would consider them to be the tool of whoever turned on the program to begin with, whoever's paying the electric bill, that they have evolved some kind of effect on our society that we would consider independent of that. What do you think?
What I'm seeing from some of the test results that are being released by the big platform companies, some from the analysis of GPT new versions, some from Anthropic, is that sometimes the AIs go about the goals in ways that hadn't been considered in advance by the designers. So the designers had expected that the AIs would do various things to try and answer a question, but the AIs were able to come up with their own new ideas. So this isn't yet coming up with brand new objectives and brand new motivations, but it's showing that the systems already have a stunning variety of different ideas at their disposal. To an extent, we already saw this with the systems that played Go and the systems that played chess, AlphaGo and AlphaZero. They came up with new strategies to win these games that took the human experts by surprise. They didn't think that such moves would be good, and it's turned out to be a whole new chapter in some of the strategies or the design and how to play games. So I think we're already seeing the possibility for AIs to be innovative in ways we hadn't expected. The risk is that they will use that innovation in ways that we don't like, which is why I'm hoping that the tests that Calum is talking about earlier on, that there won't just be tests to, do you know the answers to these questions, but perhaps we should give the AIs a chance to cheat, a chance to deceive. And if they do cheat and deceive, then we should say, right, well, you're not going out in the real world anytime soon, are you? So we should be testing them for character and values as well as just knowledge and capability.
Oh, that is very much part of the verification program. That's central to it. So I'm happy to tell you, yep, that's on the plan. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions and make a couple of observations. Firstly, you say that OpenAI is cavalier in the way it's developing large language models. And there's a series of questions. Firstly, do you boycott them? Do you not use OpenAI products? And which large language models do you think are not cavalier? Because as far as I can make out, they are all racing to superintelligence, which strikes me as being extremely irresponsible, but also unavoidable. And most of the species doesn't seem to mind, which I find very odd. The second thing I wanted to say is that boycotts have been around forever, and they only work when an enormous majority of people are convinced. You're right. I think they are working with Tesla. I think they're going to kill Tesla. They worked against South Africa. Maybe they'll work against Israel. That's certainly an open question at the moment. It's very interesting that they haven't worked at all against America, despite America declaring war on the rest of the world on April the 2nd, on Liberation Day, when Trump declared war on the penguins. And finally, are you not a little concerned in this call for the democratic processes to be sidestepped about mob rule? It's great when everybody gets riled up and does stuff if we agree with them. But when we don't agree with them, then we're not so happy about it. So in Ballymena at the moment, a little town in Northern Ireland I know a little bit about, there's an awful situation going on because anti-immigrants have riled people up over a terrible incident with a young girl. And lots of people are having their houses burned down because the mob has decided that democracy isn't working and they have to take the law into their own hands. There's a reason why we have the rule of law, and there's a reason why we have representative democracy. Most of us don't have the time, and very often not the skills, to be able to make decisions and take actions about public policy. And when everybody's encouraged to do it based on whatever hearsay, flip-flams of social media, half-understood editorials in the Daily Mail, when everybody's starting to act on those things, it can get quite dangerous.
As you said earlier, that's a lot of questions, and it's provoked probably by me rabbiting on rather too long when I had the microphone. I'm not sure I can answer all of these. I just support you that mob rule is incredibly dangerous, so I'm not advocating mob rule, though I realize that boycotts have a tendency to degenerate if we're not careful. So there must be a lot of discussion about values in there. I think there should be maybe protests in the street, but I wouldn't advocate violent protests in the street. I see more people banding together under banners such as Pause AI, actually demonstrating outside the offices of the big tech companies. I think that's great, but I would not be happy if they tried to smash the windows or do anything of that sort. So this is going to be a delicate balance. They should act within the law, but it's not just a matter of waiting till the election and voting. It should be a whole bunch of civil movement. There should be lots of articles, and it should be informed as much as possible. And that's going to be hard because there are lots of people pushing back with their narratives that, frankly, are very destructive. So that's going to be hard. I don't boycott ChatGPT myself, as you say. To be effective, you need lots of people doing it. Just as I'm not going to save the world from greenhouse gas emissions by stopping flying myself, there needs to be a much broader action that needs to be agreed. And so what I'm envisioning is there can be a collective action which is agreed and it can go in stages. If there was one of these large language models that was clearly safer and less risky and less cavalier than the others, then I would be shouting for it and supporting it. But as you said, it's not clear that one of them is actually much better than the others. I know inside the AI safety activist community, people think that Anthropics is possibly safer than the others, but it's by no means clear-cut. After all, many people who were dissatisfied with the safety culture, or rather lack of safety culture as they saw it as OpenAI, did end up at Anthropic. But it's very easy to start off by saying we're going to do things safely and securely. The commercial pressures are likely to push these values down the priority list unless there is strong social pressure, reputational pressure to keep these values uppermost in mind.
And I think Tesla, as an example of a boycott, is quite unique and exceptional. That happened because Elon Musk was very visible, very offensive to a great many people, and because he was also so visibly associated with Tesla. Try and see if you can name the CEOs of Exxon or General Motors, for instance.
Mary Barra.
Thank you. Shouldn't have tried that. But because communities have Tesla dealerships spaced at just the right intervals for mobs to form around to express local activism, that resulted in an excuse for an effective boycott. But if you look at other examples of attempted boycotts, like don't buy products of these companies because they support greenhouse gas production, then you have people like Greta Thunberg, who will not fly. She only takes boats everywhere, quite visibly, but I don't think it's made any difference to what virtually anyone else does. Maybe some people buy carbon credits because there just isn't the place to coalesce group action around. Everyone is like, yeah, that's going to cost me. So unless I know that everyone else is going to do it, it's not worth it. Right now, you have essentially the entire country of Canada boycotting the United States for reasons that have become quite apparent. And it's having quite measurable effects on various parts of the United States, but none of them are making the slightest difference to the factors that were the cause for that boycott in the first place. So that's what I wanted to say about boycotts. I want to ask one more question, primarily Calum, in the time that we have left, because I'm thinking about all these agents that you're talking about that we're going to be experiencing soon. And I think this means, fairly obviously, that the amount of conversation between agents will shortly dwarf the amount of conversation between humans or between humans and AIs. In other words, most of the interactions will take place agent to agent as opposed to human to agent or human to human. And I wonder whether in the process of doing that, we might see any emergent effects, either accidents or agents convincing other agents to take different actions from what they had originally been planning. Don't have to ratchet that all the way up to some sort of brainwashing effect. It could simply be that one agent decides it's going to buy a different stock from the one it had originally thought of as a result of something that another agent told it. I wonder if you look at that with a big futurist hat, you can see any kind of unexpected behavior on the horizon.
I'll be astonished if there isn't any unexpected behavior. And you're right. In some period of time, who knows, it might be 2 or 3 years, it might be 10 years. It's quite likely that the traffic on the internet, the conversational traffic on the internet between AIs will be greater than the conversational traffic between humans. And actually, that could be an absolutely wonderful thing, because I spend far too much of my life dealing with idiotic systems of government and companies that I have to buy things from, companies I have to supply things to. And if I could delegate all that to a set of agents, hooray, I'd love it. But yeah, you could have agents negotiating with each other. And if your agent isn't as good as the agent that is negotiating against, you might not get the outcome you want. That's, I think, a really good extra argument, or part of the argument for AI verification. It's also yet another learning curve that we're all going to go up. We had to learn how to use fire. We had to learn how to use horses. We had to learn how to use cars, computers, the internet. Now we're going to have to learn how to use AI agents. And we're going to have to learn it in a much, much shorter time than previously.
Well, let's do some final thoughts. A round of final thoughts of what you want the audience to take away from our discussion. David?
Well, I will say that what we're facing today is different from learning how to use fire, different from learning how to use automobiles, because when there was a mistake in how we did fire, a small number of people may have died. Cars killed quite a lot of people until it was safer, but they didn't kill all of society. There are risks that these agents could be connected into weapon systems, can be connected into financial systems which go haywire. We've had financial systems briefly going partially haywire with various flash crashes that are thought perhaps were caused by algorithms which are fighting each other. That case itself was controlled and managed, but as these AIs become more powerful, there is the risk that we'll go over a tipping point and it'll be too late to learn from the mistakes. So that's why we need to up our game in verification and transparency and honesty and make sure that these things are uppermost in mind rather than an afterthought. And to the extent that humans from all parts of society can express that desire, I think that's going to help the leaders of society to say, yeah, we need to do this, and we're not going to accept big tech just making up their own rules and getting away with it.
I'll go next, and then we'll bookend this with Calum. Whenever I think about the effects of AI on society now, in the next few years and further out, I am looking at it through the eyes of today's students, today's children, because I'm working with schools on their AI strategy. And the reason I'm doing that is because virtually every issue about AI, what's critical about it, intersects in education, a field which is not renowned for reacting quickly, for acting at internet speed, to dealing with exponential disruption. And yet, they have no choice now, and students are facing this. And I'm focused on high schools and starting an institute in that respect to address those concerns and how AI can be leveraged to improve the educational experience. I'm just struck by how much of our conversation here, which is a microcosm of what goes on our podcasts and other episodes and in many other shows and around the world, the conversation about AI, that so much of it is what's going to happen, I don't know. Could be good, could be bad, could be very good, could be very bad. Let's wait and see. But let's also do this thing as fast as we can. None of which mitigates against the good that it could do. But I wonder, through the eyes of a 10-year-old or a 16-year-old looking at this, who's thinking about getting into the workforce and what they're going to do, just what they're making of all of this tremendous volatility and uncertainty. And that only strengthens my resolve to make this as easy and as useful for them as possible. That's me.
Well, I'll try to offer some concluding comments without just going all over the place, as I have done in the past. Firstly, this is a bewildering time. Growing up is tough at the best of times, and growing up now, they've got so many more variables. But on the other hand, also, they've got so many great toys, and they've got so much access to information and entertainment. I don't feel terribly sorry for them. The future is rushing towards us, and change has never been so fast, and it will never again be so slow. And as our technologies get more powerful, then their potential upsides and potential downsides both get more severe. So, David, you're absolutely right. Obviously, that the peril of using a car is nothing like the peril of using a very advanced AI. And of course, where all this points is superintelligence. That's where all this is going to. One of the things about being 16 years old now is there's a pretty decent chance you're going to live to see superintelligence. That is going to make the world either really, really good or really, really bad. And I think we probably don't have very much control over it. Regular listeners to the London Futurists Podcast will know that I think it's just possible that arranging for advanced AIs to become conscious might be the best thing we can do. But fundamentally, I think it's going to be out of our control. I am a bit of an optimist. Both optimism and pessimism are biases, and we should really avoid them. But on the other hand, optimism is a lot more fun and it's a lot more productive. So I think the outcome is more likely to be extremely good. And when I say extremely good, I mean good beyond all belief. But it'd be irresponsible to deny there's massive downsides. Let's just hope we get the good.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you for organising this, Peter. It was good fun.